GWATA TV gives you a first look at North Central Washington's business news. You'll hear from our local business, tech, and education companies as Jenny discusses hot topics and current events with some of the best innovators and pioneers in North Central Washington.
Hello, North Central Washington. I'm Jenny Rojanasatian, your host on GWATA TV. Each week on GWATA TV, I interview different individuals from our community. They might be in business, education, or technology, but our goal every week is to educate, inform, and inspire. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Vicky Scharlau. She is the owner of 501 Consultants based in Kashmir, and Vicky has over 40 years of experience in her field. She really helps champion new processes for nonprofits, helping them grow and move. What's exciting about diving into this topic is that there are a lot of nonprofits in our community who are working on the vital issues our community needs, from homelessness and housing to natural resources to business development. Each of these nonprofits has a unique mission to serve and grow our community, and we're hoping that today's episode will give them some tips for running an effective nonprofit. Not in the nonprofit world. I think there's going to be some tips and insights here that apply into the private sector and business development. So I hope you'll enjoy listening and learning together. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Vicky. Welcome back to GWATA TV. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Vicky Scharlau of 501 Consultants and Kashmir Mailing House.
Yes, both.
Both companies. Welcome to GWATA TV.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. We've had the opportunity to work through GWATA and through 501 separately, but I'm excited to let our audience get to know you. And let's start there. Let's talk about your background before we dive into your companies.
So, grew up in a dairy farm in Wisconsin, milked cows until I went away to college. And had two younger brothers, mom, dad, and lived on the farm with grandma and grandpa. And I found out that being the oldest daughter and oldest child, that I didn't inherit the farm. That's a long story. But the greatest opportunity for me at that point was to go to college. So went away and did agricultural journalism and ag econ, and then started looking for work in the real world, and have pretty much always been in something related to agriculture. But as I look back over several decades, I've realized that really what I've done my entire life is focused on nonprofit organizations. So eventually that became both my vocation and avocation, and it's become a passion.
And your path to entrepreneurship really came as a result of what you were experiencing in the workplace, right?
Yes, and I think part of it stems from both growing up in an environment of small business people, because they were small farmers. So I knew what that looked like, felt like, what happened every day. But I became in an environment where I worked professionally for 10, 15 years, but I really just maxed out and I started hitting that glass ceiling. And at that point I decided I only had two choices. I could keep fighting it, or I could just start making my own path. And I decided to make my own path, even knowing that I didn't really know what that path looked like.
So when you decided to go out and start your first business, what did that look like?
It doesn't really look anything now like it did then.
Yeah.
But I had to start someplace, and I really just took that leap of faith. And I started very small and very specific. So I was doing consulting, but I continued to do the type of work that I was doing while I was still employed when I went out into the consulting workforce. And so I started there, and then as I fine-tuned my skills and fine-tuned and really, it takes a great deal of introspection and people saying, you're really good at this, or you're not so good at this other thing, and you start to analyze what that is, and you start to look at yourself in the mirror and say, there's a trend here, Vicky. You should pay attention.
Right.
So that's where it finally led to nonprofit management. But then over time, it led to more of an infrastructure of a company that provided that service to many nonprofits, because I realized what a huge need it was in the nonprofit sector for an organization that did their infrastructure and their governance and their process for them in a way that they they found repeatable and that was that they trusted and that had a system of checks and balances so that they were okay with somebody else handling, well, all their work, but also all their money.
Right. And, you know, people also often have a misconception, I feel like, about nonprofits, that it's not run like a business. But a smooth running nonprofit is running like a business. It just has a different mission and different measurables for outcomes, right?
Absolutely. So I often hear the question about, well, as a nonprofit, we can't make money. And like, if you don't make any money, you don't survive.
Right.
So nonprofit is really only a nod to the IRS tax code, which says nonprofit boards of directors means the board members can't be paid. Where in the corporate world, board members at very large level are paid. So nonprofit boards is about the board, but an organization, a nonprofit organization, has to be run completely like a business. The challenge is you have a board of directors that all have to agree on what the business is doing, what products or services are providing, and how that business is run. They can either do it themselves, if it's very small, or they have to hire professional staff, or even part-time staff, or a part-time executive secretary, something, right? You start small and you grow big. But it has to be run like a business, otherwise you're not going to stay in existence. And frankly, that's one of the areas that we tend to find where we spend most of our time, is helping those boards organize what they're going to do, short-term and long-term, and then how to make that happen over time so that there's a return on investment for either the members or the donors or for whomever invests in your organization.
And through 501, you actually lead multiple nonprofits yourself, and then you're also serving that consulting and leadership position for nonprofits in the community.
We do. We really have sort of two books of business, if you will, where half of it, not literally, but a portion of our business is we manage nonprofit organizations, both C6s and a C3. And which means one's a foundation and two of them are membership-based organizations. And then on sort of the other side of the book of business is we provide consulting services for nonprofits. Often it relates to governance or strategic planning or grant writing or grant management, or just providing training for boards of directors, especially very small groups that are struggling with how to do group decision making and how to figure out how to go from here to there, or create a strategic plan, even if it's a mini plan, and start pushing, you know, sort of the noodle down the path, if you will, and make baby steps so they get somewhere for a purpose, you know, with a vision.
And as you already set up for us earlier, board of directors of nonprofit are non-paid positions, which means these are often community leaders who are also working full-time in another capacity. So they're not devoting the day-to-day of their world to the nonprofit. So you work through kind of a careful obstacle, pushing things forward and getting time commitments and aligning vision.
Well, yes, and the reason people get on boards is because they are community leaders or they're a subject matter expert. So they get on the board and they're very motivated and they commit to things, and then as the board continues to go forward, they all have day jobs. So those day jobs get in the way, and so the commitment or the energy sometimes wanes, or there's challenging moments or weeks for time. So without a plan and an overarching purpose and really how you get things done in a step manner and according to a calendar and a budget, it's really hard to keep focus and keep everybody on the same page, because people come, people go, they can't make a meeting, or life happens.
Right, absolutely. And we're going to dive kind of into some best practices and ways to overcome some obstacles in our second segment. But before we get in there with nonprofit, your team just recently went through some rebranding, and you've got a really dynamic team at 501. So let's talk a little bit. I think it's a really cool story. Let's talk about your team at 501.
Well, we have about, I'm given the time of year because we ebb and flow based on when we have big events. But we're all women. And I don't know that was necessarily by design, but as the company grew and as we attracted people to what we did and who we were and really our core purpose and mission, it really attracted the kind of people that had a similar passion. And this now group of women has really put together and have largely been the impetus behind a rebranding. So we've got a new look, a new logo. We continue down the path of providing intentional impact, which is our mantra and what we intend to help organizations do or intend to do for the organizations that we manage. We want to be purposeful in the time we spend, in how we spend money, and in how we invest people's overall commitment to whatever the passion is. So we've also internalized that. So we're trying to make sure that we live by the mantra that we sort of put on these nonprofits. So we're being
Practice what you preach.
We're trying very hard. Some days are better than others.
Right.
But we have a new look that we think signifies more of that. So hopefully the new logo and the new, the slogans and the cut lines and everything that we use with that really will epitomize that intentional impact for nonprofits. So we're excited about it. I mean, it's a whole new look and a whole new endeavor for us.
You're right, and it's always a process. So congratulations on coming through that branding process.
It's taken us some time. I mean, it's taken months, and it's it's intentionally and very thoughtful in the process.
Right.
So.
And what does the next 5 years look now that you've got a rebrand and a growing team?
Good question. I mean, we have our very own strategic plan. So we have compartmentalized the team into so many teams, and we've got buckets of work that we're trying to push forward on our own behalf. So we're also going through the same challenges that nonprofits go through, because we've got our own strategic plan and we've got our own timeline and we have our own budget committed to it so that we can intentionally grow 501 consultants so we can provide more services for those nonprofits that we currently serve and hopefully the ones that we don't yet serve, because we're seeing more and more types of work and at a level that we can help much larger organizations but also much smaller, because they're often the most financially challenged, and we want to be able to put together toolboxes for these nonprofits so that they can take that toolbox and pick those tools out that apply to them where they need the most. And that's going to take some thoughtful time on our part and on the team's part to help put that together.
Well, that's, I led up in the intro here. It's important work because we have hundreds of nonprofits in North Central Washington.
We do.
We are so philanthropic, have great community leaders who want to give back in every category you can think of, but they need tools in order to grow and thrive and to serve more people, which is the ultimate mission of every nonprofit, is to serve in some capacity.
Right, exactly.
So we're going to head to a break now, but when we come back, Vicky's going to break down some nonprofit best practices so that whether you're in nonprofit, on a board, or even in business, maybe you can apply some of these to your day-to-day. Stay tuned. 3, 2. Welcome back to GWATA TV. I'm here with Vicky Scharlau, owner of 501 Consultants and Cashier Mailing House. Vicky and I have been talking about her experience, history, and company, but now she's going to give us some tips on nonprofit governance and structure. So let's start with some of the beginning. What are some advice you have for nonprofits as they look to make an impact?
So when a nonprofit comes to us and says we have this challenge, and often, especially with small nonprofits, it'll start with, we seem to be talking about the same thing at every meeting, and if I miss a couple meetings and I come back, we seem to have the same items on the agenda, or it just comes up again. It's like, how do we get past that? So where we will begin is asking the organizations for their articles of incorporation and their bylaws, maybe a budget, and if they have any kind of a plan, even if it's an annual budget, let's start with there, because let's start with what you already have so you're not repeating any challenges. But what we often find is, oh, I don't know where our articles are, or I think I've seen our bylaws once, but I'm not really sure. So what that tells us is that there's really not a tie between the current board of directors and the purpose that the organization was created for, or what service they were to provide. So we go back to the beginning and start by saying, why is this organization here? what are you supposed to be doing, and what does your current finances look like, so we can figure out how much wiggle room you have, and then what are you trying to accomplish right now, just this year. Let's just work on right now, and then we'll talk about maybe a couple of years out, or maybe even 5 years out. Once we have that conversation, then it's to go back and really address some of the hiccups. Like, we keep talking about the same item over and over again. How do we get past that? Well, it could be because there's not really an annual plan or even a quarterly plan for what the board is going to talk about or the organization is going to accomplish. And if there's really no vision for the board of directors, and if it's not clear in everybody's mind as to where we are now and where we're going, the same issues keep coming back up. It could be because there's not an agenda, I mean a really honest-to-goodness agenda, and then there's not minutes, so that the current board members don't know what happened in a previous board meeting. So with who's there, who wasn't there, when you started, when you ended, who made motions, do you make motions? Does everybody vote on them? Do you actually have quorum? Do people know what a quorum is? And how do you actually make a vote on a decision? And, Robert's Rules of Order, just the basic ones. We don't have to go through the big fat booklet to go, who moves, who seconds, discussion, all in favor say aye, put it in the minutes and make sure the motion is exactly the way it was made verbally.
So going to basics, you got to start off if you're at a pressure point and you're not moving forward, taking them back to the basics of the governance and the operations and how it should function to kind of level set.
Well, and also we find that almost always, maybe 99 times out of 100, when an organization comes to us and says, this is the problem we have that we need your help with, and after we start pulling the onion back and we get really into the root of the challenge, it's never that thing that they come to us with. It's always something else. So we try to help them go back and see that and then unravel why that's an issue. And then the board, has to decide as an entity that it's an issue and how to solve it as a group. Because just because the chair thinks it's an issue and wants to solve it this way doesn't mean that anybody else might agree. And that's often also a pinch point, is that the board wants to be a benevolent dictator, but boards of directors don't operate that way, and the rest of the board then has no buy-in or buy-off on movement or decision-making.
To get that going forward. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of alluded to it, then what's the plan, right? Once you have buy-in and the team is working cohesively, why is planning so important for a nonprofit?
So it really gives the board its purpose.
Okay.
So it helps the board move from month to month or from meeting to meeting, depending upon how often they meet. So, in the beginning, there should be, ideally, a long-term plan, even 2-3 years out. Where are we headed to? It doesn't mean you have to have every single detail, but you start with the end in mind. So figure out where you want to go and then back up and figure out what's the first step that we need to take. And then when do we take that step? What do we do this month? What do we do in 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and in a year from now? So that annual work plan becomes very, very important, but you really can't even get to an annual work plan unless you have a strategic plan or any kind of long-term planning. And long-term doesn't mean 100 years or even 20 years. It doesn't have to mean any more than 3 years. But something, even if it's just a basic outline of where you want the organization to be. Maybe it's financial goals, maybe it's delivery goals, maybe it's just populating your board fully. Maybe that's what you want to do for the first year. So it's really baby steps, but it's writing it all down and then making sure that we as the board of directors all agree to those steps and how long it's going to take us to get there. And it doesn't mean you have to do it. It's a target. If it doesn't happen, it's okay. Then we just move the target either ahead or back.
Or reevaluate and say...
Or reevaluate and go, oh, that was a really good idea at the beginning, but we just realized that because of all the things we've learned, it's not such a good idea. Okay, we'll move it. Or we'll take it off, and that becomes a subset, and we'll change our goal.
And when we talk about strategic plan versus work plan development, what's the difference between the two of those?
So I guess in my mind, for a board of directors or for staffing, so the board should set the long-term vision and then the mission of the organization, and then overall, what are this year's goals? What do we want to accomplish this year? If you have staff, then the board could hand over the goals and mission and vision to the staff and say, okay, Jenny, this is now your job. Figure out how you're going to create measurable objectives to achieve these goals this year. So that's where the work plan for the year aligns with the long-term strategic plan, because really those goals should be not only annual, but next year and the year after. And then when you achieve them, you can say, that's done. That can go off the list, and replace it with a new one.
And then you're also empowering your staff, because I know another pressure point with nonprofits is sometimes the board of directors wants to dictate the day-to-day of the staff, when really you just want to set that high-level objective and mission, as you said. And then, so the work plan sounds like the nice tool to kind of help support both sides.
It is, and the work plan should be detailed enough, because you bring up an excellent point that the board of directors, they're all volunteer. And if you have staff, to utilize this staff for which they were hired and for their expertise. So there needs to be a really clear line in the mind of the board about where that line is between a board of director job and staff job. But also, if the board is serving, say, in a committee capacity, or maybe as an event volunteer, that's an entirely different role. So they can't be a board member when they're a committee member or a volunteer at an event. That's a different role, and they can't pull on their board hat when they're in that role. So that's why work plans make that all very clear, and it makes it clear to you and to me about when I'm wearing my board hat and when I'm wearing my volunteer at an event hat. So I can't make those kinds of decisions just on the fly.
And I think that, I love how you've identified some of this work, because staff engagement and retention in any company or nonprofit is critical. These are tough positions, right?
They are.
And they're tough positions on volunteer boards. So when you have a healthy structure, people are usually more engaged.
They are.
They're happier in the workplace, and then your board's not worrying about turning over staff.
Well, and it really comes down to, if there were two main issues, one is job description and the clarity between staff and board, and the other one would be really ensuring that everyone has the same vision. So that's the value of a strategic plan, because you can make sure that all the geese are flying in the same direction, so to speak, and that everybody's got the same purpose and the end goal. So that's the value. That really is the only value of strategic planning, is that make sure that we can all see the same direction, and that when we get down to tactical work, day to day, week to week, month to month, we're also all on the same page, and we all have the same expectations. That makes for happy staff.
Well, I wish we could continue this discussion, because I always learn so much from you when we get together. As we conclude, any final thoughts, or one piece of advice for where you would start? You gave so many good tips today.
For boards of directors, I'd really urge them to remember they have to work and make decisions as a herd. Okay. So they can't do things individually, and even though there might be 9 individual business owners in the room, once they're a board together, they have to operate and make decisions as a herd.
Working collectively for collective impact, right?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on GWATA TV. I hope you enjoyed out there in the audience, and we'll see you next week.
Since 1999, GWATA has served as North Central Washington's Tech Alliance. As a 501c3, our mission is to bring people and technology resources together to create a thriving community. Through our work, we aim to inspire, engage, and connect.